Clara Bennett stared at her reflection in the mirror of her Brooklyn apartment, tugging lightly at the sleeve of her cream sweater as the hum of the city floated in through the window. At 27, she was working as a marketing associate at a mid-sized tech company, living alone in a modest one-bedroom, and telling herself that the loneliness she felt was simply part of adult life in New York. Friends had urged her to try dating apps, but she resisted for months after a painful breakup. Tonight, however, she was giving in, more out of curiosity than hope. She had matched with a man whose jokes were awkward but genuine, whose profile picture seemed warm enough, and though her instincts told her not to expect much, she agreed to meet him for dinner. It was supposed to be nothing important, just another boring date, and she whispered those words to herself as she brushed on mascara, determined not to let her imagination run away with her. Her apartment told her story better than she could. Books stacked high on sagging shelves, potted plants she tended like friends. A small desk pressed against the window where she sometimes scribbled short stories she never shared. Her paycheck covered rent and a few luxuries like quality coffee beans and thrift shop novels. But beyond the routine lingered a quiet ache, a sense that she was invisible in a city that never stopped moving. She reached for her coat just as her phone buzzed with a notification. Looking forward to tonight. I like that you read more than you scroll. See you at 7. Clara caught herself smiling despite her defenses. Maybe it would not be so dull after all, but she quickly reminded herself to keep expectations low. It was safer that way to treat this evening as practice, a reminder that she could still step into the world, still meet someone, still feel alive outside spreadsheets and novels. Another buzz lit up her phone, this time from her best friend Jess. Good luck tonight. If he is weird, call me and I will fake an emergency. Clara rolled her eyes and typed back a quick thanks, sliding the phone into her bag before one last glance at her reflection. Not perfect, not glamorous, but presentable. In the hallway, the old elevator groaned, so she took the stairs, passing her neighbor Mrs. Peterson, an elderly woman with her ever-present knitting bag. "Off to work, dear?" the woman asked kindly. "Not tonight," Clara replied with a small smile. "Just meeting someone for dinner." "Be safe, sweetie," came the gentle response, and Clara felt a pang of warmth at being noticed, however briefly. Outside, the evening air was crisp, the kind of early autumn chill that nipped at her cheeks. She pulled her coat tighter as she walked toward the subway, the city lights glowing against a darkening sky. In that moment, she felt small but comforted one life, among millions, not entirely alone, even in her solitude. Somewhere around her, strangers were falling in and out of love, chasing dreams, making mistakes, and tonight she was daring to join them again. On the train ride downtown, she rehearsed safe conversation starters in her head. "What do you do for work? Do you like the city? Have you traveled recently?" She felt silly, but she worried about seeming ordinary too. Cautious, too bookish. What she wanted, though she hardly admitted it to herself, was to be seen, to be recognized for more than another profile picture swiped right. Emerging at Union Square, she checked her phone. 6:58. Perfect. She smoothed her hair, steadied her nerves, and reminded herself again that it was just another boring date, nothing to lose. The restaurant was warm and buzzing, candles flickering on wooden tables, soft chatter filling the air. The hostess led her to a corner booth where she sat waiting, glancing at the door whenever it opened. Around her, couples leaned in close, laughing, sipping wine, radiating the intimacy she craved but could not imagine for herself. She picked up the menu and set it down again, restless. Minutes passed, and she scrolled through the man's earlier messages, lingering on the one that said he admired her for reading more than scrolling. It was a small observation, but one that mattered. At least someone had noticed something real about her. She smiled faintly, leaning back, telling herself that even if this night ended predictably, it was still a step, still proof that she could show up. And just before the story continues, you, the viewer, should tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from today. Clara sat in the corner booth of the restaurant, her fingers tracing the edge of the menu, though her eyes kept drifting to the door. She reminded herself again that this was nothing, just a simple night out, a practice run to ease herself back into the rhythm of dating. At 7:05, she checked her phone. A new notification lit the screen. "Sorry, something came up. I cannot make it." Her chest sank as she read the words. She had prepared herself for awkward conversation, maybe an unremarkable dinner, but not to be stood up. For a long moment, she stared at the message, debating whether to laugh or feel insulted. Typical, she thought. Another reason not to bother. She slipped the phone back into her bag and took a long sip of water, trying to decide whether to order something for herself or simply leave. The restaurant around her was alive with chatter couples, leaning close groups of friends sharing plates. She felt like an outsider peering in on a world that seemed to reject her before she even entered. Clara exhaled slowly, trying to shrug it off. It was just one night, one boring date that had not even happened. Nothing lost, nothing gained. She reached for her coat, preparing to leave. Then the door opened and a gust of autumn air swept in with a tall figure who carried himself with a quiet confidence that seemed to shift the energy of the room. Clara glanced up, only out of habit, expecting just another stranger, but froze when her eyes landed on the man who walked inside. Alexander Cole, the CEO of her company, the man she had only ever seen in board meetings and on the covers of tech magazines, was standing at the entrance, scanning the room as though searching for someone. Her pulse spiked. What was he doing here? She ducked her head, hoping not to be noticed, but when she risked another glance, she saw his gaze lock directly on her. He began to walk toward her table with deliberate steps, his expression unreadable. Every nerve in her body tensed. This could not be happening. She must be mistaken. But as he drew closer, there was no denying it. Alexander Cole was heading straight for her booth. Clara sat frozen in place, gripping the edge of the table. He stopped in front of her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Clara," he said, his voice low and warm. "May I sit down?" Her mind reeled. How did he know her name? Why was he here? And more importantly, why was he looking at her with a faint trace of recognition, as though they shared a secret? She nodded stiffly, unable to find words. He slid into the seat across from her, his movements graceful but casual, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. For a few seconds, silence stretched between them, thick with disbelief. "You look surprised," he said gently. "That is fair. I suppose I should explain." Clara's thoughts spun. Explain what? This was her boss. The man who ran a billion-dollar company. The man she had only ever spoken to once or twice, directly in the office. And now he was sitting across from her at a restaurant where she had been waiting for a date who had just canceled. Her voice came out uneven. I do not understand. Are you meeting someone here? He leaned forward slightly, his eyes steady on hers. I am. You? The words hit her like a shockwave. Clara blinked, trying to process. That message, she whispered. You were the one on the app. His smile deepened, though it carried a hint of vulnerability. I was. Clara's breath caught. The pieces fell into place with stunning clarity. The awkward but sincere jokes, the detail about her love of reading, the promise to meet at 7. All of it had come from him. She shook her head in disbelief. You are my boss, she managed. You are Alexander Cole. What are you doing on a dating app? He looked down briefly before meeting her eyes again. For the same reason anyone else is, I suppose. To connect, to be seen as more than a title, to not be alone. Clara's heart pounded. She felt exposed, like the ground had shifted beneath her. This was absurd. It was impossible. And yet here he was, flesh and blood, not the polished figure from interviews and boardrooms, but a man choosing to sit across from her in a quiet restaurant. Her mind raced with conflicting emotions: shock, fear, curiosity, a flicker of something she could not quite name. Frozen in place, she could only whisper, "This cannot be real." Alexander leaned back slightly, giving her space, his expression open and calm. "It is real, Clara. I did not plan for it to be you. But when I saw your profile, your words, I wanted to know more. I thought perhaps you might see me, not the billionaire, not the CEO, just a man." His honesty disarmed her. She struggled to find footing in the whirlwind of revelation. Around them, waiters moved quietly, glasses clinked, laughter drifted, but for Clara the world had narrowed to the man. Across the table, who was both utterly familiar and shockingly new. She opened her mouth to protest, to insist this was inappropriate, but the words tangled in her throat. All she could do was stare, her mind replaying every message, every detail he had shared with her without revealing his identity. And now here he was, no longer hidden behind a profile picture, waiting for her response. Clara could feel the heat rise in her cheeks as Alexander studied her with a calm patience that only made her more unsettled. She reached for her water glass, her fingers trembling, and took a sip to buy herself time. This was absurd. She was supposed to be on a meaningless dinner with a stranger, not sitting across from the man who signed her paychecks and ran the company where she worked. Her instinct told her to grab her bag and leave, to flee from the tangle of emotions and rules that bound this situation, but something in his eyes kept her anchored. They were not the eyes of a distant CEO delivering quarterly updates, but of a man trying to say something without words. The waiter arrived, breaking the tension with a polite smile as he handed them menus. Alexander thanked him smoothly, then glanced at Clara. "Do you have a favorite dish here?" His tone was casual, almost teasing, as if they were simply two people meeting for the first time. Clara fumbled with the menu, her voice catching. "I have been here once or twice. The pasta is good." She cursed herself inwardly for sounding so small, so ordinary. He nodded and closed his menu without looking. "I will trust your judgment. We will have the pasta," he told the waiter with quiet authority, "and 2 glasses of red wine." Clara wanted to protest that she had not chosen yet, but the way he spoke left little room for debate, and strangely she found herself relieved not to have to make another decision. When the waiter left, silence threatened again, but Alexander leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his voice lowering as though confiding a secret. "I should have told you sooner," he said. I thought I could keep the app anonymous, that it was harmless, just a chance to talk like anyone else. But when I saw your name on the reservation, I realized it was you, and I could not stay away." Clara blinked at him, bewildered. Why me, out of all the profiles? His lips curved into a faint smile that held no mockery. "Because you did not lead with filters or rehearsed lines. Because you mentioned books instead of cocktails. Because you seemed real." Her chest tightened at his words. Real. That was what she craved, to be noticed, not for appearance or status, but for the quiet parts of her life that mattered. And yet fear prickled at the edges of her heart. This was her boss. This was dangerous. She forced a weak laugh. "You realize how insane this sounds? If anyone from the office saw us," he did not flinch, "they would assume we were discussing work. And if they did not, I would tell them the truth, that I wanted to spend time with you." The boldness of his statement made her pulse race. No one had ever spoken to her like that, with such certainty, as if she were worth risking scrutiny for. She looked down at her hands, twisting her napkin, her mind a storm of warnings and desires. The waiter returned with wine, filling their glasses, and Clara gratefully took a long sip. The warmth spread through her chest, easing her nerves just slightly. Alexander lifted his glass. To unexpected evenings. Clara hesitated, then clinked her glass against his, the sound sharp and delicate in the candlelight. The meal arrived fragrant and steaming, but Clara barely tasted it. She was too aware of the man across from her, the way he asked questions about her favorite authors, her childhood in Ohio, the places she dreamed of visiting. He listened intently, leaning closer when she spoke, as if her words mattered more than any market analysis or board report. Slowly, her guard began to slip. She found herself laughing at one of his stories about his college days, a time when he and his roommate nearly burned down their dorm trying to cook ramen with a broken hot plate. The image of Alexander Cole, Billionaire CEO, scrambling to put out a small fire in a dorm hallway, made her laugh so hard she covered her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. He watched her with quiet delight, and for a moment she forgot who he was. He was just a man telling a story, and she was just a woman, enjoying his company. But then reality crept back, in heavy and unrelenting. She set down her fork and drew in a breath. "This cannot happen," she whispered. "You are my boss. There are rules." He met her gaze steadily. "I know there are rules. I also know that rules are written by people who never felt what I am feeling right now." Her heart stumbled at his candor. "You cannot just say things like that," she protested, though her voice lacked conviction. He leaned back, giving her space, his expression softening. "You are right. I do not want to overwhelm you. I only wanted one evening where we could speak without the weight of titles. If after tonight you decide you never want this again, I will respect that. But I had to try." Clara pressed her lips together, torn between fear of the consequences and the undeniable pull she felt toward him. The rest of the meal passed in a haze of conversation that dipped between light and serious laughter and pauses that carried unspoken meaning. By the time the plates were cleared and the check discreetly handled, Clara no longer felt quite as frozen. She still did not know what to think, but she could not deny there was a spark, fragile yet undeniable, flickering between them. As they stood to leave, Alexander held the door for her, his hand brushing lightly against hers. That small touch sent a shiver down her spine. Outside, the night air was cool, the city buzzing around them, indifferent to the two people, standing at the edge of something neither had planned. He looked at her, his eyes steady. "Thank you for tonight, Clara." She swallowed hard, unsure what to say, finally managing a quiet, "You are welcome." He gave a small nod, as if sealing a pact, then stepped back into the waiting black car that had pulled to the curb. Clara stood on the sidewalk, watching the taillights disappear, her heart racing with confusion and possibility. She had thought it would be just another boring date. Instead, it had become the beginning of something she could neither predict nor control. The next morning, Clara woke up with her alarm blaring far too early, her head heavy with restless dreams. She stumbled into the kitchen, made coffee, and tried to convince herself that the surreal dinner had not actually happened. Maybe she had imagined it conjured the whole evening out of loneliness and wine, but the taste of laughter still lingered in her chest, and the image of Alexander Cole leaning across the table to listen to her felt far too vivid to be a dream. She pulled on a navy blouse and black slacks clothes that suddenly felt inadequate as she prepared for the day at the office. Her company's headquarters loomed tall in Midtown, all glass and steel, reflecting the bright September morning. Inside the lobby, employees hurried past her badges, flashing phones buzzing. She reminded herself that for most of them, Alexander was a distant figure, a name in emails, a face on investor calls. For her, he was now something else, something she could not quite define, and that made her stomach twist. In the elevator, she caught her reflection and whispered under her breath, "Just act normal." When the doors opened to the marketing floor, she was met by the familiar hum of keyboards and muted chatter. Her cubicle sat in the middle row, tucked between the team's two loudest talkers. She dropped into her chair, opened her laptop, and tried to focus on campaign data, but her mind refused to settle. Every time a footstep echoed near the hallway, her pulse jumped. At 10, a meeting invite popped up on her screen. Executive review session, mandatory attendance. Her breath caught. She knew what that meant. He would be there. By the time she filed into the glass-walled conference room with her colleagues, her palms were damp. Alexander stood at the head of the table, tall in a charcoal suit, his presence commanding but calm. He nodded politely at each person as they entered, and when his eyes brushed over Clara, for the briefest second, she swore her knees weakened. She took a seat near the back, determined to avoid his gaze. The meeting began with projections and slides voices blending into corporate jargon that usually put her at ease. But not today. She kept sneaking glances at him, catching the curve of his jaw, the way he leaned forward to make a point. Once she thought she saw his eyes flick toward her just for a second before returning to the presentation. It was nothing she told herself, pure imagination. Afterward, as people gathered their laptops and notes, Clara tried to slip out unnoticed. She had nearly reached the door when his voice called softly, "Clara, a quick word." Her heart stopped. Colleagues glanced her way with casual curiosity before filing out. Soon the room was empty, just the two of them. He approached slowly, careful as if not to startle her. "Thank you for last night," he said in a low tone. "I know it was unexpected." She nodded quickly, avoiding his eyes. "It was surprising. I am not sure what to think." He tilted his head, a hint of a smile on his lips. "That is fair. I do not expect you to know right away. I just wanted to say I respect whatever you decide. No pressure." His sincerity disarmed her again. She muttered something about needing to return to her desk and hurried out before she could betray the storm in her chest. Back at her cubicle, she sank into her chair, praying no one had overheard. But whispers began to ripple. Jenna from the design team leaned over with a sly grin. "Did the boss just call you in for a one-on-one?" Clara's face burned. Just about campaign notes. Nothing else. Jenna raised an eyebrow but said nothing, turning back to her screen. Clara tried to steady her breathing, but she could feel eyes on her subtle yet sharp, as though the room had shifted around her. Over the next week, it only grew worse. In meetings, Alexander seemed to find reasons to ask her opinion. His tone always professional, but tinged with a warmth others noticed. In the cafeteria, she once found herself in line behind him, and when he casually asked about her weekend plans, a colleague raised an eyebrow with undisguised curiosity. She wanted to believe it was all in her head, but the knowing looks told her otherwise. Gossip traveled quickly in office corridors. Late one evening, she stayed behind to finish a report, the floor nearly empty. She felt the weight of someone's presence and turned to see him standing by her cubicle. "Working late," he said softly. She tried to steady her voice. "Just wrapping up." He leaned against the partition, his expression gentler than she had ever seen in the office. "I know this is complicated. If it ever becomes too much, you can tell me." Clara met his gaze, the words caught in her throat. The truth was, she did not know what she wanted. Every instinct warned her about the dangers of being seen as the CEO's favorite, yet part of her longed for the connection they had begun at dinner. His eyes softened. "You do not have to answer now. Just know that I see you." Then he straightened and left his footsteps echoing down the quiet hall. Clara sat frozen in her chair, staring at the empty doorway, her heart racing. She had thought she could compartmentalize keep work, and whatever this was separate. But the lines were already blurring, and she knew it was only a matter of time before the world around them noticed what was happening between them. That night, Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the hum of traffic outside her Brooklyn apartment, mixing with the restless hum inside her mind. She rolled over and reached for her phone, tempted to scroll just to distract herself, but instead she opened the dating app she had sworn off after the fiasco of her last relationship. There at the top of her messages was the familiar profile that had led her to dinner. The one she now knew belonged not to a stranger, but to Alexander Cole. For a moment she considered deleting it, erasing the temptation before it could grow into something uncontrollable. But then a new message appeared. "I hope I did not ruin the idea of dating for you forever." She sat up, heart pounding, and hesitated with her thumbs over the keyboard. After a long minute, she typed back. It was certainly not boring. The typing dots appeared almost instantly, and then his reply came. "That is a start." Clara bit her lip, conflicted but drawn in. They began exchanging short lines, half teasing, half cautious. He asked about her favorite author. She asked what music he listened to when he needed to think. And soon the conversation stretched late into the night. For the first time in months, she fell asleep with a smile. Over the next week, their messages deepened. What had begun as awkward pleasantries grew into something more intimate, more revealing. Alexander shared pieces of his past she had never imagined hearing from the CEO of a billion-dollar company. He told her about the relentless expectations of his wealthy family, about growing up in prep schools, where every smile was strategic, where he often felt like an imposter despite his privilege. Clara listened through the screen, her fingers moving carefully over the keyboard as she asked questions and encouraged him to keep going. She told him about her childhood in Ohio, the small library where she discovered her love of books, the dream she once had of becoming a novelist before practicality and bills pushed her into marketing. His reply came with quiet conviction. "You still could. You write beautifully." She felt a warmth spread through her chest. At his words of validation she had not realized she needed. Their conversations began to spill beyond the app, into text messages, then late-night phone calls where his voice, lower and softer than the polished tone he used at work, became the sound she most looked forward to. He would ask about her day in detail, not just the highlights but the frustrations, the little moments no one else cared about. She confessed how invisible she sometimes felt at the office, how she wondered if her work mattered. His response was immediate and steady. "You are not invisible. I notice more than you think." The words settled deep in her stirring emotions she tried to keep at bay. There was a comfort in their digital space, a sense of safety that allowed her to open up in ways she never would in the fluorescent halls of the company. At work, they remained careful, speaking only when necessary, maintaining a polite distance. But each glance across a meeting room carried the secret of the messages waiting for them later that night. Clara began to live in two parallel worlds. In one, she was the professional, competent, but ordinary employee. In the other, she was a confidant, a partner in long midnight exchanges with a man who revealed his fears and dreams without the armor of his title. The duality thrilled and terrified her. She started saving his messages in a hidden folder on her phone, rereading them on the subway during her commute. One night, after she had admitted her fear of never truly belonging anywhere, he wrote back a single line that made her heart ache. "You belong with me, even if I do not deserve it." Clara stared at the words, her fingers trembling, unsure how to reply. She wanted to believe him, wanted to give in to the tide, pulling her closer, but the voice of reason whispered about consequences. She typed and erased several responses before settling on something cautious yet honest. "I do not know where this is going, but I cannot deny that it feels real." He answered within seconds. "That is enough for now." Their bond grew in these exchanges, each message another thread weaving them together. Sometimes he would send her a photo of a book he was reading, because she had mentioned it in passing. Sometimes she would text him a line of poetry she thought he might appreciate. They built a private language, small gestures that said more than overt declarations ever could. Yet beneath the sweetness lingered tension. Clara could not ignore the imbalance, the risk of being seen as more than just another employee. Late one Friday night, after they had been texting for hours, she finally asked the question that haunted her. "What if people find out?" There was a long pause before his reply came. "Then I will face it. I am not ashamed of wanting you in my life." Her chest tightened, both soothed and unsettled. The clarity in his words left little room for doubt. Still, she worried. She knew office gossip was already swirling. Jenna's sidelong glances, the hushed conversations that stopped when she entered the room, the subtle shift in how colleagues measured her. She hated it, the way their connection bled into her professional identity, but she could not bring herself to walk away. Not when the nights were filled with words that made her feel seen in ways she had never known. One evening he called just as she was feeding herself takeout noodles, her apartment dim, except for the glow of her desk lamp. "I wanted to hear your voice," he admitted simply. She laughed, startled but touched. "You sound tired," she said gently. "Long day, long week, but this makes it better." She pressed the phone closer, her heart racing at the intimacy. They talked for hours until her food was cold, and her eyes heavy, but she refused to hang up. As she drifted to sleep, she heard his soft goodnight, a tenderness that lingered even after the call ended. By then, Clara knew she was falling for the man behind the title, the man who sent her texts that arrived like secret lifelines, the man who made her believe she was not invisible. And yet, even in her happiness, fear curled around the edges. Because deep down she knew that secrets in a company as visible as theirs never stayed hidden for long, and one day the messages that bound them together might also be the very thing that tore them apart. Clara woke to a barrage of notifications lighting up her phone, the screen buzzing against the nightstand like a warning. At first, she thought it was another late-night message from Alexander, but when she unlocked the device, her stomach dropped. Social media feeds were filled with posts about a supposed scandal involving her company's CEO. Anonymous accounts claimed that internal emails had been leaked, showing Alexander involved with an employee. Screenshots of blurred conversations circulated, and though no names were revealed, Clara recognized fragments of words that looked eerily like their private texts. Her chest tightened, dread seeping in. She scrolled faster, heart racing, and saw the headline on a tech gossip site. Billionaire CEO Alexander Cole linked to secret office romance. She dropped her phone onto the bed as if it had burned her. This could not be real, but deep down she knew it was only a matter of time before someone noticed. Their digital world had felt private, safe, untouchable. Now it was under siege. She barely had time to gather herself before an email appeared in her inbox marked urgent. "Report to HR immediately." The walk through the office that morning felt like moving through glass. Colleagues pretended not to stare, but Clara caught the flicker of recognition in their eyes. Whispers followed her down the hallway, subtle but sharp like tiny knives, cutting at her composure. In the HR office, two representatives sat across from her with carefully neutral expressions. One of them, a woman with sharp glasses, folded her hands neatly. "Clara, we need to address a serious matter. Allegations have surfaced that you are engaged in a personal relationship with Mr. Cole." Clara's throat went dry. She wanted to deny everything, to insist this was a misunderstanding, but the weight of their scrutiny pinned her in place. The man beside her spoke next. "We must remind you that company policy explicitly discourages relationships between executives and direct employees due to power dynamics and risks of favoritism. If there is truth to these allegations, your position here could be compromised." Clara clenched her hands in her lap. "I have done nothing to compromise my work. My performance speaks for itself." "That may be so," the woman replied calmly, "but perception matters. If the board or the press believes there is undue influence, it puts the entire company at risk." Clara felt a cold sweat trickle down her spine. They were not just questioning her relationship, they were questioning her integrity, her worth. After the meeting, she stumbled back to her desk, her vision blurring. Her phone buzzed with a message from Alexander. "Meet me tonight. We need to talk," she typed back quickly. They know HR just called me in. His response came almost instantly. I will handle it. Do not worry. But how could she not worry? She was the one sitting under fluorescent lights with colleagues casting sidelong glances. The one whose career was suddenly dangling by a thread. By evening, she met him at a quiet cafe, far from the office. He was already there, his expression grim, his phone buzzing relentlessly on the table beside him. The board is furious, he admitted, rubbing a hand over his face. They think I have jeopardized the company's reputation. Clara's voice trembled. They called me in today. They made it sound like I could lose my job. His eyes hardened with determination. That will not happen. I will not let them punish you for something that is my responsibility. But she shook her head, fear sharp in her chest. This is not just about responsibility, Alexander. It is about perception. They will always assume I am here because of you, not because I earned it. He reached for her hand across the table, his grip firm. You are here because of your talent. No one can take that away from you. She wanted to believe him, but the noise outside was deafening. Over the next days, the scandal escalated. News outlets speculated endlessly, some publishing blurry photos of Alexander leaving their building, others running opinion pieces about ethics in workplace relationships. The story became fodder for morning show's analysts, debating whether the board would pressure him to step down. Clara avoided the cafeteria, skipped after work drinks, and left the office by side exits to dodge questions. The isolation weighed on her. One afternoon, she received an email notifying her that she was being reassigned temporarily to a different department while the matter was reviewed. It felt like exile, a silent punishment, wrapped in the guise of procedure. That evening, she broke down in her apartment, tears spilling as she read Alexander's message on her phone. They cannot dictate my heart. I am with you, always. She wanted to text back that she believed him, but her fingers hovered, paralyzed by the weight of doubt. Later that night, he called. His voice was steady but laced with exhaustion. A rival company is behind this, he revealed. They hired someone to hack into our communications, twist fragments into a story. Clara's stomach nodded. So all of this, he nodded, though she could only hear it in his voice, manufactured, designed to make me look careless. And they are using you to hurt me. Clara closed her eyes, pain swelling in her chest. I never asked for this, Alexander. I just wanted something real. I know, he said softly. And you are the only real thing I have had in years. She pressed the phone to her ear, listening to the weight in his tone, torn between relief that the truth was not entirely her fault and fear of what would come next. Because even if the leaks were fabricated, the consequences were painfully real. The HR pressure, the board's anger, the whispers at the office. Their world had cracked open, and she was no longer invisible. She was exposed, judged, and cornered. And though Alexander's voice promised strength, she wondered if love alone could withstand the storm gathering around them. Clara thought the worst had already unfolded, but the following week proved otherwise. Rumors had transformed into open speculation, not just online, but within the walls of the company itself. Whispers traveled faster than official memos, and her name was now linked in hushed tones to the CEO in a way that made her skin prickle. The reassignment to another department was humiliating enough, but what truly broke her composure was the arrival of Vanessa Hale. Vanessa was a former partner of Alexander's, a sharp-witted executive in the same industry who now represented a rival corporation. She appeared at a networking event that Clara's team was obligated to attend, her presence drawing attention like a magnet. Dressed in a crimson suit that spoke of power and confidence, Vanessa worked the room with calculated ease, greeting investors and journalists alike. When her gaze finally settled on Clara across the room, the faintest smile curved her lips, a smile that was both beautiful and cruel. Clara tried to avoid her, but Vanessa found a way to corner her near the refreshment table. "So you are the famous Clara Bennett," she said smoothly, her tone drenched in false sweetness. "The employee who has managed to capture Alexander's attention." Clara stiffened, keeping her voice steady. "I am here for work, just like everyone else." Vanessa's eyes glittered with amusement. "Work, of course. That is what we all call it." She leaned in closer, lowering her voice so only Clara could hear. "But let me give you some advice. Alexander does not do serious. You are a distraction, and when the novelty wears off, he will remember where he belongs." Clara's stomach twisted. She wanted to respond, to defend herself, but the words stuck. Vanessa continued, her tone sharper. "I knew Alexander long before you and I know what he craves. He belongs in this world of power and strategy, not in cozy apartments with girls who play at being writers. He may think you are different now, but give it time." Her words struck at every insecurity Clara carried, every doubt she had tried to suppress. Vanessa straightened with a satisfied smile and walked away, leaving Clara shaken and struggling to catch her breath. That night, Clara recounted the encounter to Alexander over the phone, her voice trembling with both anger and fear. She sought reassurance, but his silence was heavy before he finally spoke. "She is trying to get into your head, Clara. Do not let her. You are more than enough." But Clara could not shake the seed of doubt that had been planted. In the following days, the pressure at work intensified. The board of directors began circulating memos about professional conduct, and though they did not mention names, everyone knew who the target was. Meetings became colder, the atmosphere tense, as if the company itself were holding its breath. One afternoon, Clara overheard two colleagues whispering in the hallway. "It is only a matter of time before HR makes her leave. They cannot let this go on." She hurried past, pretending not to hear, but the sting lingered. Her work, once a source of quiet pride, now felt tainted, overshadowed by assumptions she could not erase. Meanwhile, Alexander faced his own battle. Board members confronted him behind closed doors, urging him to clarify his relationship status and protect the company's image. Some threatened to withdraw support if he did not end the scandal swiftly. Clara caught fragments of these confrontations in the news, her heart aching at the realization that she had become both weapon and weakness in a game she'd never asked to play. The breaking point came when Vanessa appeared again, this time in the press. In a carefully orchestrated interview, she spoke vaguely about corporate ethics, about leaders who allowed personal distractions to affect their judgment. She never named Alexander, but her pointed comments left little doubt. Clara watched the segment in her apartment, her chest tight, as the interviewer nodded gravely and speculated about Alexander's ability to lead. By the time the clip ended, Clara's hands were shaking. She called Alexander, demanding to know why Vanessa was allowed to speak so freely without consequence. He sighed heavily. "Because if I strike back, it looks like confirmation. That is what she wants." Clara's frustration boiled over. "So I just sit here while she tears me apart." He paused, his voice softening. Clara, listen to me. None of this changes what is between us. But she snapped back, what if it does? What if I am dragging you down? His answer was immediate, firm. You are not dragging me down. But his conviction only highlighted her uncertainty. That night, Clara sat at her desk staring at a blank page in her journal, trying to put her feelings into words. Every sentence unraveled into self-doubt. She imagined herself as Vanessa described her, a temporary distraction, a foolish employee tangled up in a world she did not belong to. And though she hated Vanessa for saying it, part of her feared it was true. In the office the next morning, the tension reached new heights. Alexander entered a board meeting with the press already camped outside, demanding answers. Clara watched from a distance, her stomach in knots. She wanted to believe him to believe in them, but the whispers, the stares, the pointed silence all chipped away at her resolve. By evening she could not bear it any longer. She texted Alexander, "Maybe we need space, for your sake and for mine." His reply came quickly, almost desperate. "No, do not say that." But she did not answer. She placed the phone face down and sat on her bed in the dim light, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She had walked into the app, expecting nothing, just another boring date. Now she was caught in a storm of rivals' rumors and relentless scrutiny, and for the first time, she wondered if love, however real, could withstand the weight of a world determined to break it apart. The pressure built like a storm cloud that would not break, darkening everything Clara touched. The following week, headlines screamed about insider favoritism, accusing Alexander of giving her projects unfairly, even though she had been reassigned and stripped of any responsibility. Stock prices dipped as speculation grew, and investors demanded an emergency board meeting. Clara felt the walls close in tighter with every step she took at the office. Whispers became open avoidance. Colleagues stopped including her in group lunches, and when she entered a room, conversations abruptly ended. She felt poisoned, as if her presence alone had contaminated the company. Meanwhile, Alexander was summoned before the board in a session so tense that even the assistants outside the conference room could feel the strain through the glass doors. They told him bluntly that his relationship with Clara was destroying the firm's reputation, that media narratives were more powerful than his denials, and that the only way forward was to end things quietly. Alexander listened, his face composed but his jaw tight. When they were finished, he rose and said simply, "I will not lie about who I care for. If you think the company is stronger without me, then I will walk away." The declaration stunned the room, and though they threatened further, Alexander left without bowing. That night he came to Clara's apartment, his hair disheveled, his tie pulled loose. She opened the door to see the exhaustion etched on his face. "They want me to let you go," he said quietly, and for the first time she saw doubt a flicker in his eyes. Clara's breath caught. "Maybe they are right," she whispered, her heart twisting. "Maybe I am hurting you." He crossed the room in 2 strides and gripped her hands firmly. "You are the only thing keeping me sane right now. Do not ever think you are the problem." She shook her head, tears spilling. "Look at what is happening. My career is gone. Your company is bleeding. People look at me like I am a scandal instead of a person. How can this be worth it?" His eyes softened, but his voice carried steel. "Because you are worth it." The next morning, the crisis escalated further when a rival outlet published a piece alleging that Alexander had funneled opportunities directly to Clara. They named her outright this time, dragging her photo from a company website, painting her as a manipulative employee who had ensnared her boss. Clara nearly collapsed when she saw her own face on the front page of a gossip blog. She wanted to run, to disappear, but Alexander stopped her. "Enough," he said. "We are not hiding anymore." That afternoon, he called a press conference, ignoring the board's frantic objections. Clara sat frozen in her apartment watching the live stream as cameras flashed and reporters shouted. Alexander stood at the podium not in the armor of a corporate giant, but in a plain navy suit with no tie, his expression unguarded. "I have been accused of many things in recent days," he began, his voice steady but raw. "That I compromised my company, that I engaged in favoritism, that I allowed my personal life to interfere with my duty. Some of those accusations are based on falsehoods created by rivals, but one truth remains. I am in a relationship with Clara Bennett, and I will not deny it." Murmurs rippled through the press corps. Alexander continued, "Clara is not a scandal. She is not a distraction. She is a person of integrity, intelligence, and heart. If there is blame to bear, it is mine, not hers. I will answer to the board, to investors, to shareholders, but I will not sacrifice what is real between us for the sake of appearances." He paused, his gaze steady, his shoulders squared. "The world sees me as a CEO, but I am also a man, and like any man, I want to be known, not for the titles I carry, but for the love I give." Cameras flashed wildly, reporters hurled questions, but Alexander stepped away from the podium, leaving his words hanging in the air like a banner of defiance. Clara sat in stunned silence, tears streaking her cheeks. He had done what she never expected. He had claimed her not as a liability, but as his truth. The fallout was immediate. Stock prices wavered, critics called him reckless, and board members fumed. But messages also poured in, from employees, from strangers, from people across the city who admired his honesty. Some called it foolish, others called it brave, but no one could deny it was real. That night he appeared at her door again, weary but unbroken. "I told the world," he said simply. "Now there are no secrets." Clara stepped into his arms, her heart pounding. For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt a spark of hope. They might be battered, their worlds shaken, but they stood together in the open, no longer shadows, no longer whispers. And in that clarity, despite the chaos outside, she realized that love had given her something he thought she had lost forever. A place where she was no longer invisible, a place where she was seen. The days following the press conference were a whirlwind of scrutiny and speculation. News anchors dissected every word of Alexander's speech, while investors debated whether his defiance was admirable or irresponsible. Clara walked through the city with her head lowered, conscious that strangers might recognize her face from the tabloids. At the office, she was placed on administrative leave under the guise of protecting her from harassment. But she knew it was really about protecting the company from scandal. Alone in her apartment, she scrolled through articles, her heart aching at the way journalists painted her as either a temptress or a naive pawn. Alexander checked in constantly, calling between meetings, sending her reassuring texts. One evening he appeared at her door looking grim. "We traced the leaks," he said without preamble. "A rival firm hired hackers, and Vanessa helped them by providing internal access codes she still had from years ago." Clara's eyes widened. Vanessa. His expression hardened. She wanted to ruin me, and she thought using you would be the easiest way. Clara felt anger surge, but also relief that the truth was finally surfacing. Still, she asked the question that haunted her. Will it matter? People already believe the worst. Alexander stepped closer, his gaze steady. Then I will show them the truth. That weekend, he called a meeting with the board and presented the evidence of the rivals' interference and Vanessa's betrayal. The revelation stunned the directors, shifting the narrative from Alexander's recklessness to a deliberate attempt at sabotage. Though not everyone forgave immediately, the tide began to turn. Clara watched from the sidelines, her emotions tangled between pride and fear. That evening, Alexander asked her to meet him on the rooftop garden of his penthouse, a place she had never been. She hesitated at the heavy key he had sent with the address, but curiosity and longing pushed her forward. As she stepped out onto the rooftop, she gasped. String lights twinkled among planters overflowing with ivy and roses. The skyline stretched around them, the city glowing against the night sky. Alexander stood near a small table with 2 glasses of wine, his expression softer than she had ever seen. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. She folded her arms, trying to steady her nerves. "You could have chosen anywhere in the world, and you brought me here. Why?" "Because this is where I feel most like myself," he admitted, "and I want to be myself with you." They sat together sipping wine as the cool breeze carried the scent of the garden. Conversation flowed hesitant at first, but growing warmer. He spoke of the loneliness of success, the isolation of being admired but never truly known. She confessed her fears of becoming defined by him, of losing her own identity. He listened intently, his eyes never leaving hers. Finally, he set down his glass, took her hands across the table, and said the words she had never expected. "The world may see me as a CEO, but with you I am just a man. And I am asking if you will let me be that man with you." Clara's breath caught her heart thundering. Alexander reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a simple diamond ring. Elegant but understated its beauty in its honesty rather than extravagance. "This is not about wealth," he said softly. "This is about certainty. You saw me when no one else did. You believed me when the world wanted to tear me down. Clara Bennett, will you marry me?" Tears welled in her eyes as the weight of his words sank in. All the fear, all the whispers, all the doubt dissolved in the face of his unwavering sincerity. She nodded, her voice breaking. "Yes." His relief was visible as he slid the ring onto her finger, then stood to pull her into his arms. Their kiss was gentle at first, then deeper, a promise, written not in headlines but in heartbeats. Around them, the city roared with life, but for Clara and Alexander, the rooftop was silent, a world of their own. Later, they stood side by side at the railing, gazing out at the skyline. Clara leaned into him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you sure about this? You could lose everything." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "I would rather lose everything than lose you." And in that moment, Clara realized that no rival, no board, no headline could erase what they had built. For the first time since their story began, she allowed herself to believe in forever. 6 months later, the storm had passed, though traces of it lingered in headlines, archived online, and whispers that occasionally resurfaced in boardrooms. Clara and Alexander now lived together in a renovated brownstone in Brooklyn, a compromise between her craving for warmth and his tendency toward sleek luxury. The penthouse remained but empty, a relic of a life he no longer wanted to inhabit alone. Their shared home smelled of fresh coffee in the mornings, and of pages and ink from the stacks of books Clara kept tucked in every corner. A rooftop garden thrived under their care roses and herbs growing alongside string lights that turned evenings into quiet sanctuaries. Clara had left her old role at the company, not out of shame but out of choice. With Alexander's unwavering support, she pursued her long-buried dream of submitting short stories to journals, spending afternoons at a neighborhood cafe drafting chapters of a novel. She was still Clara Bennett, not the CEO's girlfriend, and that mattered more than anything. Alexander had faced the board with steady resolve, instituting new ethics policies that openly addressed workplace romance, requiring reviews and transparency rather than silence and fear. It was a pragmatic step that turned their scandal into a catalyst for change. And while some investors grumbled, employees quietly respected the honesty of the move. In their private life, Alexander continued the small gestures that had first connected them. Every evening before bed, he sent Clara a single text, even if he was sitting right beside her. "You are more seen than you know." It became their ritual, a reminder of how it began words, on a screen carrying weight far beyond their simplicity. Their relationship was not without challenges. Alexander's schedule was relentless global calls, dragging him away at odd hours while Clara battled insecurity about stepping fully into the world of publishing. Sometimes tension flared sharp words spoken in the heat of exhaustion, but always they returned to the truth they had promised on that rooftop, to face the chaos together. One autumn evening, Clara sat at her desk, rereading the opening chapters of her manuscript, when Alexander entered carrying takeout containers. He set them down and leaned over her shoulder to glance at the screen. His smile softened. "You are really doing it." Clara closed the laptop, embarrassed. "Maybe." He kissed her temple. "Not maybe, definitely." Later they ate on the couch, Gatsby the cat curled between them, the city lights spilling through the window. For a while they were simply a couple, like any other, debating over which movie to stream, teasing each other about who always forgot to water the plants. Months later came the wedding, not a grand spectacle in a ballroom, but an intimate ceremony in the garden of their brownstone. Only close friends and family attended, Jess standing proudly as Clara's maid of honor. The vows were simple yet heavy with meaning. Alexander promised to always see her not as the world demanded, but as she truly was. Clara promised to stand beside him, not as an accessory to his empire, but as his equal partner in every quiet and extraordinary moment. Their kiss under the string lights drew applause and tears alike, and for Clara it felt like stepping fully into a life she had never dared imagine. In the days that followed, the media still tried to capture glimpses of them, but the frenzy had cooled, replaced with curiosity rather than scandal. Articles spoke of Alexander's resilience and Clara's quiet influence, framing their story as one of redemption rather than controversy. Clara saved every letter, every article, not out of vanity, but as proof that they had survived. One evening she presented Alexander with a leather-bound book she had created. Inside, she had pasted all the messages he had ever sent her, from the earliest app exchanges to the nightly ritual text. On the final page, she added her own words, "You saw me when I was invisible. You gave me the courage to see myself. His eyes misted as he closed the book and pulled her close. In their brownstone, the world seemed smaller, more manageable, a place where they belonged without pretense. Outside the city roared as it always did, full of ambition and distraction. But inside they had carved out something ordinary and extraordinary at once. Love that had begun with an app mistaken for just another boring date had endured scandal rivals and relentless pressure. It had proven itself not through grand gestures, but through constancy, through late-night texts and quiet mornings, through honesty that refused to be silenced. And as Clara looked at Alexander, across their small kitchen one morning, coffee steaming, she realized the story they had written together was not about a billionaire and an employee, nor about scandal and survival, but about two people who had dared to believe that being truly seen was worth everything. She reached for her phone, smiling at the familiar message waiting there. You are more seen than you know. And for the first time, she typed back with certainty. So are you.